right, welcome back, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Samantha and Remoy.
Yeah, my name's Remoy, George Philip the First.
And this is Masculinity. So it's been really interesting to see the wave of guys being involved in the Me Too campaign and to see men speaking out about issues surrounding gender inequality in general. And as we've talked about, the concept of woke feminism and men writing that fine line of feeling for the people in their lives who have survived abuse or trauma at the hands of a man, but also having a hard time modifying their own behaviors is a complex situation that we can only try and make sense of through conversation.
Yeah, I guess that's what makes this concept of allyship so interesting but multi-layered, because on the one hand, gender equality is it's a men's issue just as much as it is a woman's issue, correct? When we take a look at equal pay for women, we should also be looking at the types of jobs we as a society consider acceptable for men to have. When we address sexual, domestic, and intimate partner violence, it's super important to note that while women outnumber men as victims of said crimes, there are a large number of men who are victims as well, and it's up to us, all of us, to create a society in which it is encouraging for everyone to come forward and seek out support when they, he, she, we have been violated.
And there are layers to this allyship business, right? Because I read recently that there can be different forms of allyship. Allies for self-interest, allies for altruism.
I didn't know this.
It's great. I'm so excited to get into it. Allies for social justice, right? Which is who our illustrious guest is today.
And he looks debonair and handsome. It's all get out. Oof, that tweed jacket is hot.
Okay. So now we're gonna get into those different forms in a bit with a little bit of help from Hudson Taylor. So Hudson Taylor is the founder of the organization Athlete Ally, which is dedicated to making space for LGBTQ athletes, from high school athletes to Olympiads, if I'm correct, and just doing really awesome work. So Hudson, thank you so much for being here, for just coming to talk to us about your work today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So I was lucky enough to attend the event where we met, the Center for the Study for Men and Masculinities at Stony Brook put on this event for activists and researchers. And so it was really inspiring to hear the work that your organization does, but specifically to hear your approach. You had very specific tiers of how you implemented this. But before we get to that, I just want to hear a little bit about what Athlete Ally is. I already know, but Remoy wants to hear. Yeah.
So I'll begin at the beginning, I suppose. So I started Athlete Ally now 7 years ago. Wow. Just had our seventh birthday, actually, last week.
Oh,
officially!
Happy birthday!
Thank you. And yeah, so our main work is obviously to end homophobia and transphobia in sports and to mobilize athletic communities to champion LGBT equality outside of sports, but sort of my origin of doing this work came about in a really unexpected way. I was a wrestler my entire life. So I've started wrestling when I was 6 and loved my sport, loved so much of what it gave me and taught me, but there was also a lot of things that I needed to unlearn for my sport.
Sure.
And I was unique in that I was this very accomplished wrestler, but I was also a theater major. I was that kid warming up to show tunes, and so I had two very different lives. One which granted permission to forms of expression and exploration, and the other which very much restricted them. And that juxtaposition kind of opened my eyes and made me kind of take a hard look at what I was doing on my team and in my capacity as a team leader to make my athletic community a more welcoming one. And so the catalyst for Athlete Ally really came about my senior year. I started my senior season ranked, I think, number 2 in the country in my weight class, training to win a national title.
It's flex right now. Right.
But I started the season wearing an LGBT equality sticker on my headgear, mainly because I thought it would look cool, but also that it would start a conversation that really wasn't happening in the athletic community that much at the time. And as a result of that sticker, a lot of things happened. One, it started a lot of conversations with my teammates. 2, one of my coaches pulled me aside and was like, Hudson, would you be willing to do an interview about why you care? I said, sure, of course, no problem. I would find out later that that coach of mine was gay and that he wasn't out yet. And so he was sort of seeing me have these conversations and not engaging himself. But then the third thing that happened was I did that interview. I think one of the things that's still most important to me in all of this work is that, progress doesn't occur unless we have difficult dialogue. So when I did that interview, I asked them if they would share my email address with the article. Like, let's debate, let's talk about this stuff. And I really just wasn't ready for the response. About 2 days after that
article. How old are you again?
I'm 31.
No, how old are you at that point?
I was senior in college, so.
That's a lot of interesting
22.
emails you're getting as a senior in college.
Exactly. And in a sport that's not that popular, right? Like, it's not one of the marquee sports.
But it is a hyper masculine sport as well. So.
We can definitely try to get into that a bit, but essentially I had over 2,000 emails from closeted athletes from across the country who wrote to me and said, I just read this article and I'm going to try out for my wrestling team. I'm going to go into the locker room. A lot of first time quote unquote allies saying, hey, I'm going to support my gay brother or my lesbian sister or my transgender friends. And so that was the moment of like, wow, if I could do that by wearing a sticker in a sport that people don't really care about. If I had been a football player or a professional athlete or a team or a league, that impact would be exponential. So that was the beginning of Athlete Ally, really saying like, look, we have to be having these conversations and we have to be intentionally working to change the culture of sports and the conduct of its constituents.
Okay, so one of my favorite television shows of all time is going to be Friday Night Lights. Texas Forever.
Coach Taylor, absolutely.
Coach Taylor. Clear eyes, clear hearts, clear eyes,
can't
full
lose.
hearts, can't lose. But what that
knowledge for me. Okay.
one of the best shows of the 2000s, easily. What that show did so well was it whether it meant to or not, it really communicated locker room culture very well. And locker room culture is very masculine, and there is a sense of quote unquote brotherhood, which is real. You are brothers, you are in a fraternity almost in that locker room. But there is also this nature of exclusivity and bullying and so on and so forth. I understand your experience like being in theater, but also being an athlete and having that as your platform to stand on. But where did you get the confidence, whether it's in the locker room or whether it's in kind of the athletic sphere, to stand up and be so confident about that and make those?
Yeah. So it definitely wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a long, slow process of getting educated, of building confidence. As an athlete, like you are given cultural capital, right? You are given privilege, and
male athlete especially.
And when I was in 6th grade, I won nationals for the first time in my sport, right? At my age group. Mm-hmm. So at a very early age, I was like, okay, I'm
good at this.
I'm good at this. and when you're in that, like sport is a competitive reward structure, right? It teaches its participants to judge each other, not only your opponents, but your peers, right? Who's varsity, who's junior varsity. And the things that we're measuring in terms of the quality of someone is not how they treat people. It's not the language that they use. It's
results oriented.
It's results, right? And so because I had those results throughout my entire athletic career, that helped make me feel, it was like permission granting in a way. It was like, well, I don't really care what other people think. This is what I believe to be right. This is what I think sport should look like. And I'm going to do what I can, where I can, to make that the reality.
Sure. Okay, so then how do you, as Athlete Ally, how do you demonstrate the need for the service that Athlete Ally provides to various institutions? Like, it seems like they'd be focused on winning games and, not necessarily worried about social justice.
Yeah, because one of a two-part thing that I want to add as well is like, you saw the need and you saw the responsibility, in your own life, having kind of that dichotomy of theater and sport. And so you took it upon yourself, like you really became responsible for that, which is, if I'm being real, admirable. But then how do you kind of like instill that in other people?
It's a daily struggle for sure. I think there are many reasons why sport continues to be less inclusive, right? And so a lot of the way that I think about this is if we can first identify and understand the obstacles, then we can start to create strategies to overcome them, right? So, some of the biggest obstacles for our work is that sport is sex segregated, that it teaches a gender binary. And so as a result, sport as a socialization mechanism teaches masculinity and femininity
innately
in very narrowly defined ways, right?
Sure.
So that's we're going to have to put that to the side because that's, until we rethink the structure and the rule set of sport, some of these issues are being taught because of the rules, because of the way in which sport is structured. But then, the things that I think are more within our control, I think, conformity continues to be a major obstacle. I think athletes want to be liked by their peers. And so if we can change, if we can make sportsmanship synonymous with allyship, then conformity errs on the side of action.
Beautiful.
Right? Right now, it's you conform to stay silent. You conform to laugh at a homophobic or a sexist joke. But if we can change that narrative, I think we very quickly can start to change behavior. And then the other piece of this is, I think, context. Growing up as a wrestler, because of the culture of my sport, I didn't have any openly gay teammates. Right. And so as a result, when you hear the language, when you see the behavior, you're thinking, well, does this impact me? Does this impact my team? If I don't see anybody visibly who's impacted by this language or behavior. And so, in 1990, the average age of a person coming out was 26. Today, that average age is 14. So the context is growing. I think the comfort level with engaging on LGBT issues, on social justice. We're obviously seeing an enormous expansion of athlete activism across the country. These are all sort of indicators that things are moving in the right direction. But in terms of how do we get people to actually engage and feel comfortable in more granular sense? A lot of it is trying to create alignment on our core values, right? What are the things that we believe in as athletes, as coaches, as people who are fans of their sport. And if we can connect the dots between someone's core value, between their dominant identity and these principles of respect, inclusion, and equality, then it's no longer our goal is to not make it about what's right or what's wrong, but instead by having a conversation about who are we as athletes, as leaders, as people, as human beings. There's a lot of ways in which we try to frame those conversations. In any environment, we're trying to get alignment on why you should care and what you should do about it. And so that why is going to be framed a little differently for each audience member, and the what will change as well.
Before we go any further, you're a cisgendered white male, correct?
Yeah, correct.
So what is for just the common listener, what is allyship like? What does the animation of allyship mean? What does that look like for you or for them, for these listeners?
Yeah. So I think we've approached the concept of allyship not as a identity, but as a philosophy. So if I think about the principles of allyship, it's really a series of actions that a person either does or does not take, regardless of how they identify. We find people who might be wonderful allies to the LGBT community, but they're not to communities of color or to women, right? And so that's a failure of allyship, right? So we try to walk back and say, okay, well, very tangibly, what are the things that you can be doing to help dismantle any system of oppression or discrimination? Right, because everybody can do something. And then the second thing that I think we're always trying to think through is that defining what we call the ally commitment curve. So everybody is somewhere on their journey to better understanding. They're somewhere on their journey to understanding their privilege and what they can do in response to it. our job is to help define for that person what is the next step they feel comfortable taking to make the world a better place. Mm-hmm. So I know that not every athlete is going to be an outspoken activist, as much as I would love for that to be the case, but trying to identify where that person is on that commitment curve and help them take that next step is really central to what we're trying to do.
No, that's very like a fantastic, like practical and pragmatic approach, in the sense that a lot of us who have an opinion would like those who don't share our opinion to just jump the ship or jump the curve and get right to where we're at and just get there, and that's our expectation. But that is a horrendously inhumane expectation. But in this sense, by developing this curve mentality and like a step-by-step process, right, like a ladder, rung by rung, it sets a lower expectation, but with a greater opportunity for success.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there will always probably be a spectrum of opinion on most social justice issues. But
Which is not a bad thing.
Yeah, right? People have their own perspectives and opinions. However, if we can shift the entirety of that spectrum a foot closer to equality, or, you know, that world we want to create, the world is very different.
Yeah.
People's lived experiences are very different. Yeah. And so for us, the challenge is, I think a lot of organizers and people working in these spaces, their audience isn't always the people who need to hear the message the most, right? Who need, like, I want to reach that athlete who doesn't think they have LGBTQ people in their life, that they don't think they should or can care, and just get them to take that next step on that ladder. And if we can get everybody in those positions to take that next step, you know, hopefully our sporting environment really changes.
So I have a question actually about the implementation of that, because, you know I remember from the presentation that you talked about education, policy, and advocacy as the ways that you structure your approach for Athlete Ally. And kind of going back to this notion, to this fact really of the segregation of sports, you know, like, so what I think I remember from the way that you kind of approach, like when you're going to locker rooms and when you're doing the training, you know, there's a conversation to be had about gender. There's a conversation to be had about sexual orientation. There's a conversation to be had about sexual identity. So like the bare bones of people implementing the training that Athlete Ally, like, what does that look like? Like, is it like, how do you, like, do you really go step by step? Like, I mean, what does it look like really is what I don't know.
Yeah. So when we're working with athletes or coaches, typically the framing of the conversation goes in 3 phases. The story of me, the story of us, the story of now. And that story of me is going to change depending on who's facilitating the discussion. Mm-hmm. But really, it's trying to root this conversation in somebody's personal experience. So, you know, the last 4 years, I've had the opportunity to work with every incoming NBA player. So I get to do
Excuse me?
Yeah, I get to work with all the NBA players on LGBT respect and inclusion.
Excuse me?
How
yeah.
did I miss that part of the? I'm obsessed with the NBA.
Tell me that.
I thought I knew. Oh wow, that's awesome.
So
I'm stepping away.
So obviously, my part of it is talking about my journey to doing this work. But then Jason Collins, who was, you know, Brooklyn Net, the first active out male athlete in one of the big 4 professional sports. He shares his story and experience. So the first piece of this is rooting the conversation in like a person's actual experience. And then step 2 is the story of us. So that's really trying to get alignment on where are we? What are the current obstacles and issues? Why aren't you more vocal? What is the language and behavior that you see that is not inclusive? Why do you think that's occurring? And so there's a lot of different directions that can take depending on who's in the room. And then the third phase is the story of now. Okay, you know who we are. You know what the issues are. Let's talk about what you can do about it. And so that is where we get really granular and prescriptive to say, okay, step 1, like get better educated on that thing you feel least comfortable talking about. Step 2, like become more conscious of your language. Don't make assumptions. Don't use heteronormative language. So kind of running through all those things. And then from there, it really branches out to, you know, what forms of visible action do you feel comfortable taking, right? For some, that's taking to social media and sending a tweet. For some, that's wearing a wristband, or, like
Sure.
It looks very different depending on the athlete or coach we're working with. But that's typically how our trainings are structured.
One of the things that, we want to have, one of the big reasons why I wanted to have you on the show, because of Athlete Ally being an amazing organization, and like the work you do is so poignant and directed. And I also think that it's really could be a model for like so many different forms of allyship, and we're here talking about masculinity. The whole point of the show is to create to create gender equality as a societal problem rather than as a woman's issue, right? And I really feel like, kind of like paralleling, or basically taking the approach of Athlete Ally and having it just pervade through gender equality would be super, super useful, And I think one of the things that you said that is huge is like talking about it in a very like the story of me, right? Like people don't pay attention until it's in their own backyard. So I wonder, right? Like in your own personal life, if you don't mind sharing, what does it look like for you to be an ally personally? You know what I'm saying? And like, what is that like for you? Like, how do men out there become the ally without necessarily thinking that it does something to their manhood or their masculinity or whatever?
That's actually, I think, a really difficult question. I think it's so much of this work is like having to go on your own personal journey, right? And like, as much as we could talk about the best practices and the policies that should be in place and the things we want people to do, until they look inward and like start to think through who they are, what they want their legacy to be, like their culpability in so many egregious things that are happening in our communities,
or nuanced things that happen.
Yeah, or the nuanced things.
Sure.
I think actually probably absolutely. I mean, when we're working with athletes, whether they're fourth graders or professional athletes, we'll ask, how many of you in the last week have heard somebody say that's so gay?
Right.
About 95% of the hands go up, regardless of the age group. Second question: how many of you, when you heard someone speak out against it? Every hand goes down. Right. And so there is still a culture of apathy on LGBT issues. And I would just say, in our work, and I think in terms of how we're thinking about applying this, despite all the good progress that's happening, we still have a crisis of allyship. I mean, I think the majority of the athletes that we work with are LGBT identified, right? The most vocal, passionate people are still those who are directly impacted by a system of discrimination, right? The athletes who have been taking a knee up until relatively recently have been predominantly athletes of color, right? We still don't have male athletes having the back of female athletes and talking about equal pay. So, despite the good that's happening, I think we still have a lot of work to do to get people to be better allies to each other, right? It's still very self-interested and like I'm going to speak out when it impacts my friends or my family. But how do I engage on things that are happening globally or with people who I don't interact with on a daily basis?
So when this starts at a young age, when sports happens at a young age, you mentioned coaches, right? And coaches are the gatekeepers of the locker room, like Coach Taylor. Like that's the ideal perfect coach, right? But that isn't every coach, and a lot of these coaches are supplemental father figures, and a lot of these coaches are supplemental just male figureheads. And again, they are the gatekeepers of those locker rooms. Is there like tailored work specific to coaches, and what does that look like?
Sure. So coaches are so important. My coaches were like father figures to me. So, and I assume that's the case for so many athletes. I think the things that we're looking for coaches is first and foremost, like one, define your core values. So what do you stand for, right? What do you expect of your athletes? And making sure that those core values are intentionally LGBT inclusive, right? I think a lot of times we'll see non-discrimination policies and we'll see these codes of conduct, but they don't say the words, right? And because it's not assumed that a coach is talking about an LGBT athlete, we want them to say the words.
Yeah, they're being theoretical, you mean?
Yeah, or like, for instance, my coaches were great, but, they made it very clear that I could talk to them if I ever had an issue with a girlfriend. They did not say the words that I could ever talk to them if I had an issue with a boyfriend, right? And while that didn't impact me, for that LGBT athlete in the room, those words are not being said, and so the assumption is that it's not a welcoming space, right? So we're looking for defining the line on day one, right? Really being explicit about the standards that a coach is going to hold their athletes to. We're looking for the proactive policies that will sort of form the foundation of that culture. We're looking for what a coach can do to make a consistent commitment. So I think this is where there's a lot of challenges because, we know that locker room language is happening every single day. And I think because it's so normalized, so many coaches don't feel the need to intervene. So how do we develop a culture where coaches are intervening every single time they hear the identity of a group of people used as the basis of an insult, right? How do we get coaches to not assume that all of their athletes are heterosexual or cisgender, right? So I think a lot of coaches still assume wrongly who their constituents are, who their athletes are. We try to coach coaches on how to have organic, authentic conversations. So, I think everybody who wants to do more kind of still struggles with how do I start the conversation? How do I go there? And so one of the things we help athletes with is say, look at the media. Every single day there's a different issue happening in sports that you can use as a talking point with your team. Cleveland Indians are now finally changing their logo. Let's talk about that. What do you all think about that? And just actually using current events to have a proactive conversation, because I think that's where you then so much of I think the culture is about perception versus reality, right? And if we're not doing our work to change that perception for the better, then you are culpable and you're responsible for any perceived discrimination or lack of inclusion.
So a lot of locker rooms are incredibly masculine, and I wonder, from your experience, the idea of initial pushback versus a later acceptance from athletes. So initial pushback would be man, la la la, to at some point where a switch flips and then they become more empathetic and sympathetic and understanding, and then bring their own personal selves into the conversation.
I think a lot of times we're a long way from where we want to be. If you look back at let's talk professional athletes, I'd say in 2008 or 9, there was a lot of athletes who were getting in trouble for the use of homophobic slurs, right? It was something that was happening more frequently. And then over the course of a couple of years, the education started to improve. So therefore, athletes became more conscious of the things they were saying. However, when you actually ask an athlete, well, how do you feel about having an openly gay athlete in your locker room, right? And we actually talk about, hey, would you be willing to have that athlete come to the after party with their partner, right? There is still some very tangible, real breakdowns in the kinds of cultures we're looking to create. I think most athletes who are high performing understand that sport is a meritocracy, right? They understand that they want to have the best teams possible, and that means they need to have a diverse and inclusive team. Sure. However, when you try to extend that to how we treat each other off the field, off the court, in our daily lives, I think there's still a lot of hard work to be done.
What I always think about in terms of exclusion is how short-sighted it is, right? And I think that what you're pointing to in terms of off the court and like just brings to mind the kind of difference that you can make in sports. I think one of the things you said when we were at the presentation in November was that, you know, sports is fully created. Everything about it is something is human made, and so it's really, I mean, it can be used as an opportunity to really create. It brings so many people together. It's like, it's almost like neutral ground in a way. Well, or at least it can be perceived that way, right? At least these days. And so I don't know. I just I love what you just said for that reason, and I just, in terms of allyship and what it looks like to be an ally who is for justice rather than for self-interest, like protecting those around them or making themselves feel good. I just really think that sports can be a huge agent in that, which it seems like you might kind of have figured out also. So, yeah.
I mean, I get really radical on you, but, you know, if I think about sport 200 years from now, right? Like the NBA is less than 100 years old. So it's a $1 billion business that's less than 100 years old. So the things that seem so concrete and written in stone are really not that old. I mean, especially the evolution for women and girls in sport. I mean, we're still not that far away from women being gender tested routinely at the Olympics, right? So there's really the policing of gender is still, there's like really ugly things that are still happening in and through sports. But but there has been progress. There has been change, right? Catherine Switzer was the first woman to run the Boston Marathon just 50 years ago, right? So if we imagine sport 200 years from now, I think you have a far more fluid structure. You have a more inclusive rule set. You allow people with physical disabilities to play sport with able-bodied people, right? There's no reason why we can't redefine how we think about sport, and then I think by extension the values that those activities teach its participants. You know, we continue to have, like, I also think that sport has this global ripple effect, right? Like, there's a lot of the top female executives are former athletes, right? So like we know that sport has good sort of pro-social outcomes for those who get to participate in it. We know that it's a good bonding experience, right? The Sunday is the Super Bowl is right.
I was like, what's happening
Sunday? What's happening Sunday? No. And yet, because of the inequalities in sport, those inequalities ripple throughout society, right? Because the female athletes aren't paid equally, neither are the executives or women in general. You know, I was like speaking at a middle school the other day, and I was trying to like ask them what are the inequalities that they see, and the girls volleyball team was saying, you know, we practice in this gym every single day. It's our last day of practice, and we're getting kicked out of the gym for the first day of, you know, baseball practice, or like, you know, like, so there are still these really clear-cut ways in which sport is not treating men and women and boys and girls equally. And so I think if we can rethink sport, we can rethink the rules, the structure, the cultural values that we're teaching in and through sports, you know, the world would be a very different place.
I agree.
I think a lot of parents use sport to like be a secondary education for their kids, and a lot of parents would say that, you know, sport teaches their boys how to be better young men, or better men, in air quotes, and in a sense, learning, whether they know it or not, what we're calling masculinity with a K, right? Mm-hmm. But that isn't necessarily the responsibility, or the responsibility isn't on the kids, it's on the parents. So I'm wondering, do you get a lot of pushback from certain parents? And if so, how do you navigate those waters?
Yeah, I think that's an area that continues to be a big challenge for us. I mean, the majority of our work has traditionally been happening at the college and professional level. Okay. And so at those spaces, we can be very specific about everything. The younger we go, the more parents like start to put up roadblocks for these conversations. I was speaking. I did a week of speaking at middle schools in Sarasota, Florida, and every kid needed to get a permission slip signed by their parents in order to even hear me speak. And when I go and work with a group of students or athletes, I'm really just talking about like principles of respect, right? It's like I'm doing like the most basic, like, hey,
golden rule.
Yeah. So I think parents are a really tough one. But what I would say is that if a parent has an athlete, has a kid who's in sports at a young age, chances are they're also tuning in to the professional athletes on the weekends, right? So if we can get our biggest athletes to be saying, I care about LGBT equality and you should too. I think that has the ability to change the opinions and the perspective of more parents than anything else.
Well, I mean, this is amazing. I feel like I want to continue talking to you for hours on end about this. I do want to just say thank you for doing the work that you do, because it's true. It's a social justice allyship. It's not self-interest. It's not, you're a cisgender white dude. You could go on and do whatever, and you're really, you took matters into your own hands, and you're doing what needs to be done because you saw a need that needed to be met. And like, that is exactly the kind of leadership that we need to see if we really want to see change. And I think that one of the things you said about sport looking different in 200 years is not like that wouldn't happen by accident, and I think that's important to say, because people think that progress is like, oh, well, as time moves on, no, it's because people are actively taking steps to alter the course of history, and I think, and I just, I really do want to just express my gratitude. Yeah.
To understand the effects that you're having on locker rooms, whether it's on the professional level, which is hella cool, or whether it's on, the JV football team in Sarasota, Florida. That's incredible. Thanks. So for more people to learn about what you're doing or find out more about what you're doing, where do they go? What do they read? Where do they find you?
They find us at athleteally.org, all the good social medias, Twitter, Facebook. Just look us up at Athlete Ally. We have a lot of exciting things happening in the coming year. Yeah. So I know, super briefly, I'll kind of show you the master plan a little bit, right? So you mentioned education, policy, and advocacy, right? On the education side, we're actually starting to do more K-12 work. And so what that looks like for us is actually building an online curriculum for coaches, right? So ultimately, geography is a big barrier to this work. So we're trying to build online resources to eliminate that barrier. On the policy side, we're starting to rank and report the LGBT policies of college athletic departments. So actually putting a name and a number to where athletic departments match up on their LGBT policies. So we started with 65 D1 schools, and we're just trying to grow that out to try to hit all 3,000 eventually, but that'll take us some time. And then on our athlete activism work, it's really trying to connect with the state-based LGBT organizations who are trying to push back against RFRA legislation or anti-trans bathroom bills, or on the good side, trying to promote, trying to pass non-discrimination ordinances. And then we're trying to connect teams, leagues, and athletes to those state-based groups to help them move the needle. So if you're listening and you want to get more involved, definitely check us out at Athlete Ally. But if you have any connection to sport, let us know. Call your old coach or PE teacher, ask them what they're doing on LGBTQ issues. And the other very specific ask I would have for anybody is pick 3 people in your life to start this conversation with.
This has been an amazing, super illuminating conversation. And you guys, thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to comment, send us a couple, tweets, posts, say what you feel about this, and say specifically how we can help, or even if you disagree, maybe we can start some dialogue and actually, move the needle. So you can find us at Masculinity Pod on Twitter. That's Masculinity with a K, always. Masculinity Podcast on Facebook. And our email is masculinitypodcast@whoistheo.com. My name is Samantha and Zessie.
Yo, my name is Remoy George Philip the
And this has been Masculinity. Ciao.
Peace.